Hi, I'm Brandon Shahan with Sukup Manufacturing Company. Welcome back to our dryer service video series. Today, we're going to be talking about moisture sensor accuracy. I'm going to start today talking about our T6045 moisture sensor. This is a really good sensor. Grounding is very important in getting a good moisture sample. So I'm going to go over the grounding of this sensor here. On the front of the sensor here, there's ground plates, which has to make good contact with the metal when you install. It's important to make sure it stays clean.
Another thing that we should do to improve moisture sensor accuracy is remove the moisture sensor from the dryer a couple of times a day and clean it off. The first step in that process is to come to your touchscreen and pause the unload system. And it says, it explains what we're going to do, and I say I want to go ahead and pause the unload. That's going to shut my entire unload system off for 2 minutes, and it's going to have a 2-minute countdown clock. So that'll be enough time to walk to the back of the dryer, remove the sensor from the dryer. There's going to be some grain come out, so you may want a bucket under it. Make sure you wipe the flag off really well. Wipe off the ground plate. Where that ground plate touches the steel on the dryer, wipe that off well too. And then the hole the moisture sensor goes in, take your glove and wipe that off as well. Any dust, debris, fines that stick to the inside of that tube can change the capacitance value. Once we've got that all done and the moisture sensor reinstalled, we come back to the touchscreen and simply push resume unload. Now if we don't make it before the timer expires, there's not a danger. The dryer will just shut off completely and we'll just simply restart it. But hopefully we get back here within 2 minutes and we resume the unload.
Next, we're going to want to make sure that we have good grounding. An 8-foot ground rod comes with every Sukup dryer, and then we supply this wire to be ran from the ground rod over as close as you can to the moisture sensor. I have a ground rod installed over here, which I have one wire connected to the static sampler as close as possible to the moisture sensor. And then also we supply another wire that needs to go from the ground rod to the power box.
Another thing to check for moisture sensor accuracy is to make sure you have the right moisture sensor selected in the right configuration and the right grain type. So to do that here on a QuadraTouch Pro, we're going to go to Settings, Grain Settings menu, Moisture Sensor Configuration, and here's the sensor location. So if we had a jump auger and it's just warning us we need to check the grain type, we could change to that. If we had a static sampler, we'd select that here. This is where we would select how many samples we are averaging for our control moisture. So in this case, we'd be averaging the last 5 samples and then using that for control with a static sampler. And then up here, we select which moisture sensor type that we have. So if we have the newer green style T6045 or T6045S sensors, we're going to select those up here. We'll back up. Here's where our grain type selection is. Generally, we're going to be on corn, but there are pre-settings in here for soybeans, wheat, barley, rapeseed, rice, oats, and some custom ones. Generally, we want to make sure that corn is selected, and we're going to hit apply. It's warning us about changing grain type, Celsius to Fahrenheit, discharge sensor type. All those things would remove the calibration from the moisture sensor. So if we'd already calibrated our moisture sensor and we changed one of those things, we need to recalibrate it. We want to make sure we do that on target. I'll hit yes and back out. Another thing to take a look at is isolating the discharge moisture sensor cable and then putting a shield around the PLC. So this is Service Bulletin L2497, and it describes here's the yellow moisture sensor cable, and in a lot of dryers originally this went to the right side of the dryer and went in a different conduit with a bunch of other wires. Essentially what we're doing here is isolating this and running it in one conduit all by itself, so we don't get any interference on the voltage feedback for the moisture sensor. I'll flip ahead here a couple pages. The other part of this is the PLC inside the power box, and in some of the earlier dryers the PLC was more in the middle of the box. You can see a fan contactor here with wires that were kind of draped in front of that PLC. That can also cause interference. So there's this shield that goes around and in front of the PLC itself. You can see the part numbers here, and then you want to make sure you take those fan power wires and bend those around away from the PLC. The next topic to look at is meter roll timing, and what we're concerned about here is the left upper meter roll versus the right upper meter roll, and we want one of them, in this case the left one, to look like a plus sign or a T, and the right one to look like an X. And then we're concerned about the bottom left to the bottom right. Again, we want one of them to be a plus or a T and the other one to be an X. We're not concerned about top to bottom. They turn at different speeds anyway. But left to right, we want T and X. And what that does is it allows one meter roll to dump and then the other one to dump and then back and forth. So especially when you're running at low metering roll speeds, we want the meter rolls to dump alternately instead of dumping once at the same time and then having a big pause and then dumping again, because that big pause can lower the amount of grain on the moisture sensor, giving it a less accurate result. So you can check that by inside the back of the dryer, removing the access panels that are up here, looking in there and seeing where your meter rolls are. If they need to be adjusted, you go to the front of the dryer, break the chain, adjust the meter rolls to where they need to be, and then put the chains back on. Another thing that can affect moisture sensor accuracy is the unload auger and the clearance of the unload auger to the rear discharge tube and inside the dryer. So starting at the back of the dryer, you have this circle here represents the auger. In most cases it's a 7-inch diameter inside a 10-inch tube. And the gap between the bottom of the flighting and the bottom of the tube is important to be at approximately a 1/4 inch or a little over that. Big enough gap where we're not going to grind kernels, but we need to keep it tight enough where it's going to push grain over the moisture sensor and prevent fines and stuff from building up and sitting on top of the moisture sensor, giving us a bad reading. And as augers wear, especially where it's cut out for that moisture sensor, we've seen a lot of these augers, wear back. They get sharp and then start wearing back, and it does a worse and worse job as it wears. So a lot of times that clearance needs to be checked. The unload auger may need to be replaced. And as long as it's a good auger with the full diameter, putting a piece of 1/4 inch rod down here at the bottom to set that is a good way to do it. And then if we move back inside the dryer, where we've got these panels at 45 degrees, the cam lock system on the bottom, another panel at 45 degrees, the gap that we want from the flighting to those panels is about a 1/2 inch. So an easy way to do that is take a piece of 1/2 inch board, cut a board to reach in there and just slide it along the dryer. Make sure you don't have any pinch points. Everywhere there is a hanger bearing with the oil impregnated wood block hanger bearing in there. There's 4 bolts where that hanger bearing bracket bolts to sheet metal to hang that, and those are slotted so they can be raised up and down. So important to have a 1/2 inch here inside the dryer and a 1/4 inch here on the discharge tube. If you have a jump auger on your dryer, it's important to have the moisture sensor covered. There are rain shields available to cover the moisture sensor. The other things we've learned on jump augers, whenever you can get condensation, there's enough surface area exposed on the 3 sides of the chute where the grain is that it can make grain or fine stick on the inside of that. So particularly when it gets really cold, things start to stick, and that gives a bad reading on the jump auger. So in good conditions, jump augers can be a good thing, but if you get a lot of condensation or get to colder weather, it might be better off to remove the jump auger and put the moisture sensor back in the bottom of the tube. Remember, you can watch this video and more on our website at www.sukup.com or our YouTube channel, Sukup MFG.